So we come to the end of the two-day Sedex 2018 conference, and with us is the CEO, Jonathan Ivelaw-Chapman. The title of this conference was Defining Beyond Compliance. How far do you think the conference has gone in managing to do that?
Yeah, I think it was never going to be answered properly. I don't think anybody can really give you that answer because actually every single person in the room had a different interpretation of the word. You can get all really granular around beyond and compliance, but what I think we got was a recognition that that phrase, beyond compliance, has some meaning and some force and actually some trajectory now, and I think Sedex has done a good job with the participants in making sure that that kind of is reinforced in terms of the world at large recognising that there is a statement around beyond compliance.
Somewhat controversially though, the question of the merit of audit has been raised several times, and that's going to put the cat amongst the pigeons amongst those companies that provide those sorts of services. So what sort of reassurance can you give to them?
Yeah, it's in the AGM this morning. We had a challenge off Noises Left, actually, from a non-member from an audit company saying this is really quite challenging, this is quite controversial, I'm really worried. My challenge back to our sponsors and to all of those that have spoken to me before this conference when this theme came up was, what are you frightened of? You heard from Marco Baron around, there's still due diligence at the bottom left-hand corner in terms of you start somewhere. It doesn't change the perspective. What it allows you to do is build on the basics around doing an audit or asking an SAQ, a self-assessment questionnaire question, and allowing you then to build in your own program and your intelligence around that.
What changes are you anticipating then in terms of relationships between the different parts of the supply chain? Because a lot of people were talking very much about trust and changing the power balance, really.
Yeah, it's it moves from being a two-way relationship between the auditor and the brand or the retailer to a three-way one where you bring in the worker, you bring in the supplier at the same time. You can no longer, I think, value or just take a judgment based on purely a transaction that says we, the brand or the retailer, are going to audit you, the supplier. I think the conversation now becomes a three-way one. And we also talk about the human factors, given that we are social and labour, as well as environment and business ethics and health and safety. I think what you've got to do is recognise that the human factor, the worker on the floor, the janitor, what have you, is as important in the discussion, and that drives the behaviour bottom up. So that three-way relationship is critical.
Well, if it is all about then making life better for the people involved in the supply chain and also protecting the environment, you've got over 50,000 members now. What does this mean for the kind of services that those members are going to expect of Sedex?
Broad church is what Sedex has today. So we have, in my opening slides, we talked about the maturity of some of our members who are 14 years into this journey in terms of Sedex's evolution, but we are still seeing new businesses who are barely 6 months, 12 months old joining Sedex, who are at the very, very start, very nascent in that approach, who have absolutely no real idea of what's before them, but are desperate to make sure they comply. And that compliance is driving, I think, sometimes the wrong behaviour. That's why we push back to our brands and retailers to say it's not a comply or die audit only biz. It's about education, it's about the transparency in that process, and also, as again, Marco said at the end there, really, really powerfully, which is to make sure that we don't tell people off. It's not name and shame. It's name and praise in terms of bringing people forward. And I think that seed change in the approach is really, really welcome, and that will support everybody.
With some trepidation then, you're going to ask me a question which I really don't feel comfortable with, but go on.
I always wanted to turn the tables on somebody, and I'm fortunate enough it's you. I just wanted to ask you, because you're an independent in this process, you report on the consumer side of things all day, every day. That's part of your day job, and you see the outputs of some of the horrific things that happen, whether it's modern day slavery or issues of nurdle spillage in terms of the oceans. You see the plastic oceans issue that's on Sky. You report all the time in terms of what the papers say. As an independent, as an outsider, what did you feel that you heard about our attempt to try and deal with those issues that consumers have to deal with all day long?
I had no idea how much was going on behind the scenes, that all of your members do quite increasingly collaboratively, sometimes driven by what consumers are saying they want from the people they're buying goods and services from. And I think that there should be a way of trying to convey that to the viewing and listening public somehow. It is difficult though, because it's quite dry sometimes, it's quite technical, it's about systems and system thinking. I don't know how you translate that easily, but I do think that there's so much going on that's so good that would actually give business a more positive profile. So that's probably your challenge.
So I think coming back from that, you have to report on the negative side, the impact of some of the things that happen. But what you hopefully saw in the last 2 days was the impact of things that we're trying to do to make sure that those don't happen, or we minimise the impact of those things. And I think that the industry as a whole recognises that we are hugely impactful and demanding and challenging, and we can hurt the world in various different ways if we don't address these issues. And my industry, my members are hugely supportive of Sedex and other initiatives like Sedex in making sure that we do a better job. And that's now gathering momentum and speed. So hopefully you'll start to report less on some of the things that are negative and more about some of the positivity. I'd love to come on and tell you about the positive things as well.
I should try and find opportunities to do that. It's been a very, very steep learning curve for me, but
yeah,
everyone's made me very welcome. Thank you for the opportunity to be here.
You're very welcome, and thank you for your support too.
It's a pleasure, Jonathan. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed.